What's up everybody? Welcome back to my second installment of my three-part video series I'm doing on good motorcycle platforms for people that want to build cafe racers. Now this is the intermediate video, so this is going to be kind of the bikes that are a little bit more expensive, maybe a little bit harder to work on and get that cafe racer look, and maybe they're less available and parts are less available as well. So those are the bikes we're going to be focusing on for this video. So the first bike on the list for today is the BMW R series of motorcycles. Now these bikes are really interesting bikes and probably a good mid-level, mid-tier option for people wanting to build a cafe racer. And they're a little bit more expensive of a bike, but they're one of the most mass-produced bikes ever in history. So they're pretty easy to find worldwide. It's just you're gonna have to cough up a little bit more money for one of these bikes. One of the main reasons for this bike being a good option for kind of those intermediate builders is the boxer engine that it has. Now the boxer engine on these BMW R bikes is decently reliable, and it sounds great, and also it keeps your weight lower. It keeps your center of gravity lower, so the handling on these bikes is going to be pretty awesome. Now something you're going to have to keep in mind with the boxer engines of the BMW R bikes is they're a little bit different mechanically to the inline engines that are in most of the bikes that were in the first video. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at one of these to work on. Now one of the reasons I put this bike in the mid-tier category is the frame. Now the frame is kind of an unorthodox shape when you're trying to get it to look kind of more like a cafe racer. And a lot of people will end up making these bikes into sort of bobber type bikes because the frame just, it holds a small seat really well, and having that small seat and big tank kind of makes it look a little bit more like a bobber, or a cross between a bobber and a cafe racer in my opinion. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind if you're really going for that cafe racer look, is you might end up with something a little bit different. That's okay. Now I did say the bikes are a little bit more expensive, and that goes for parts as well. So parts might be kind of a little bit harder to find, and they're going to be more expensive than your Honda parts or your Kawasaki parts or your Yamaha parts. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for one of these bikes. So next on the list is one you might have heard of, and that's the Yamaha Virago. Now the Yamaha Virago, if you look at them online, they make really cool cafe racer builds once they're finished. But if you look at them in stock form, they are probably the farthest thing on this list from a cafe racer in terms of looks. They're definitely more of a cruiser style motorcycle, and yeah, it doesn't look like a cafe racer out of the box. I'm just going to tell you that. So it's going to take more fabrication and more work on your part to get that cafe racer look. Now some interesting things about these bikes, they're shaft drive, so they're going to be a little bit more reliable, a little bit less maintenance in that department. And if you're looking at ones before 1984, they were also a monoshock design, so that can yield some really cool cafe racer looks if you buy one that has a monoshock on the rear. Now a couple things about this bike that kind of put it on the intermediate list are they're a little bit harder to find, and the aftermarket's a little bit smaller, so you might have to get a little bit more creative when you're coming up with custom things for design and stuff like that, and it might be harder to find parts and stuff, so just keep that in mind. Also, another thing about the Virago is it's got a V-Rod engine, which is, again, if you're used to working on the inline engines of CBs and the like, definitely something you're going to want to research a little bit. But it's a great sounding engine, and they're pretty well balanced too, so look forward to that if you're looking at one of these. Okay, number 3 on the list is probably my personal favorite for this video, and that is the Honda CX. Now, I think my favorite thing about the Honda CX is the 90-degree V-twin engine that they have. I just love the way that it sits in the bike, and it's a really cool look. Now, this bike was made in the 80s, and it definitely looks like it when you get a stock one. And I will say it's not the easiest bike to make into a cafe racer because, for one, the front end sits a little bit higher up, and it just takes a little bit more modification than some of the beginner bikes to get that cafe racer look. But I will say once these bikes have been modified and customized properly, they're one of the best looking cafe racers in my opinion, just because of that engine. It just looks so good. So this is a shaft drive bike, so once again, kind of lower maintenance in that area, and it's also water cooled. So for one, you're gonna have less of a risk of overheating if you're riding in hot temperatures and hot climates a lot, and two, kind of a negative, it's gonna be a heavier bike just because of that system. So definitely pluses and minuses with that. I will also say that this bike is not the fastest, so if your main objective is to go super fast, this is probably not the bike for you. But if you want a unique bike and something that will be interesting to work on and interesting to learn about, definitely might be a good project for you. Okay, number 4 on the list is the Kawasaki W650. Now this is a generally newer bike. It started production in 1999, and if you're in the US, this might be kind of a harder one to find because they only sold it for 2 years in the US, and after sales didn't do very well, they decided to focus their efforts on the Asian and European markets. So kind of a harder one to find if you live in the US. Now this bike has a low compression parallel twin engine, so that comes with its pluses and minuses as well. For one, this bike's probably going to go forever. These bikes were designed for high mileage, so you'll probably get a lot of use out of it. And they're also easy to service. Now the trade-offs for that are these bikes aren't particularly loud, fast, or intense for your riding experience. So again, if you're wanting a wild, crazy loud bike, this is probably not the bike for you. This is also one of those bikes that looks really great from the factory, so it's probably not going to take a lot of work on your end to get that cafe racer look that you're after. Also, one note if you're looking at these bikes, I've heard that the clutch assembly on these is not as strong as the engine, so definitely keep that in mind when you're shopping for one of these. So, the 5th and final bike on the list is the Triumph Bonneville. Now the Bonneville has an interesting history. It was made in kind of 3 runs from 1959 up until now. It's being made right now. So there's a lot of different kind of generations of the Bonneville. So just keep that in mind when you're shopping for them because they come with their differences that we'll kind of get into here. Now these are the bikes that kind of started the cafe racer craze in England. So they're definitely fast. And they've got their cachet, as Marlon Brando rode one in the movie The Wild One. So expect to pay a pretty penny for one of these bikes because they're really famous. So let's talk about the engines. In the first iteration of the Bonneville, they came with a 650cc engine. The second generation had a 750cc engine, and the current bikes come in 800, 900, and 1200cc variants. Also something to keep in mind, the newer variants of this bike have electronic fuel injection, so if you're wanting to do a lot of custom work on the engine to make the bike faster or louder or whatever, just keep that in mind because that system is going to make working on a newer bike a little bit more difficult. Now this is one of the most expensive bikes on this list, so definitely keep that in mind, but with that comes the clout, I guess, of having a Triumph and having one of the bikes that started the whole cafe racer craze, so there's that. These bikes also look great with just a few little mods because they look really great out of the factory, and if you get a new bike, honestly I don't think you really have to do anything to it to get the respect from the cafe racer community because they just look that good. Okay, so that's it for my list of 5 bikes for intermediate bike builders that want to build cafe racers. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like and subscribe down below for the next iteration of this video because there's going to be the top tier bikes coming up next. And if you haven't checked out the beginners list, definitely check that one out as well. I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, enjoy the road.